Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's event, Day-to-Day and in Crisis, How Dallas, Texas Promotes Transparency Through Social Media. This is Morgan Wright. I'm a Senior Fellow for Government Technology. I'm also a former law enforcement officer, state trooper detective from the great state of Kansas. But I'm more excited to serve today as the moderator for today's event. Just want to say thank you for joining us. Folks, if the pre-call was any indication, you're going to have a great 60 minutes. We had a great discussion before we all came on air today. Now, before we begin, just a couple of brief housekeeping tips. A recording of this presentation will be emailed to everybody within 48 hours. Use this recording for your reference, or feel free to pass it along to the folks who could not attend today. This webcast is interactive, so you'll see a Q&A button at the bottom. This is going to be a really good time. Make sure that you get your questions into us. I guarantee you're going to have a lot of topics come up you're going to want some answers to, so make sure that you get us that question, and we will get to them as many as we can at the end. And also, if you'd like to download a PDF of the slides today, you can do so by clicking on the Webinar Resources widget at the bottom of the console. Now, also during today's webinar, if you're on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, somewhere on the interweb, just use hashtag GovTechLive to connect with everybody and let them know that you're listening to some great content today. And at the close of the webinar, folks, you're going to get a brief survey. We encourage you to fill out that survey. This is the way we've made tremendous improvements. We've actually, because of your suggestions, have gone deeper and longer on certain topics and drilled down into more things with longer sessions. So make sure you fill out that survey, and if you can't stay for the whole thing, just click that survey widget down at the bottom and fill out as much as you can before you go. So we want to say thank you guys again in advance for filling that out. If you have any other issues, we've got our crack staff today, Michael from On24. Put your questions there in that chat box, or we have a webcast help guide that you can click down at the bottom. So let's get to the good part. So joining me today to discuss this very timely topic is Justice Snazzle, and he's the Senior Public Information Officer for the City of Dallas, and Anil Chawla, he's the Founder and Chief Executive Officer for ArchiveSocial. So what we're going to do today real quick is I'm going to give you a quick social media by the numbers. Justin's going to come on and do a presentation talking to you about promoting transparency through social media. Anil's going to come on and give you legal aspects of social media use, and then we'll do live Q&A. But before each of the presenters, we're also going to have a poll, so make sure you stay tuned and watch for the poll that's going to come out. So let's talk real quickly first about social media by the numbers. First thing we wanted, there's actually three numbers we need to worry about, and those are the ones right there, 1, 2, 3, and what are they? Well, the very first number we need to worry about actually goes to this one, and it is the First Amendment of the Constitution about free speech. So always dealing with governments, there's always the issue of how much speech is free speech. Can you delete? Can you edit? Can you hide? You know, what are the issues around the use of free speech in a forum like Facebook and Twitter? So we're going to get into some of those issues, but I guarantee you that is one of the challenging issues, and it's one of the more risky issues when you are in government dealing with these things. What's the second number? Well, it's the two things we want to talk about under this. The first one is transparency. At the Center for Digital Government, we do a biannual survey, and we look at some of the top issues for government, and the top issues, transparency is either first or always tied for first. So people want to see the process of government. They want to be able to ask questions, get results, get answers. So that transparency, and obviously that's part of the discussion today, is how Dallas promotes transparency through social media. The second one is accountability. You have transparency so that you can have accountability. You can hold your elected officials or appointed officials accountable for results, or accountable for decisions they've made, or accountable for results that you're looking for. So then the third number three, there's three things under this one. So anytime you deploy a new technology, first thing you've got to have policy. Folks, if you've ever driven a car or gotten a license for something, first thing you do is you're in the classroom. You're learning the rules of the road or learning the rules of engagement. So there's a lot of policy that has to happen. Then as you see here, this is training dog. So training, but we want to train for the behaviors we want. So first of all, we know what the policy is, just like driving a car when your children get licenses, God forbid. Mine's 28 now, so we're past that. But, you know, the first time they're in there, they're in that simulator. Then they go out for drives, but they're always, you know, they're training. Then the third thing you get, only then do you get access. And I guarantee you, folks, that F-117, pilot doesn't get to sit in that advanced piece of weaponry until they've sat through the classroom, they've studied, they've gone through the policies, they've been in the simulators. Then and only then do you get the technology. And then if you do that, make sure that you just don't do something like this person did, which is they put out their tweet talking about their schedule, and if you look down at the bottom, not only did they put out their username, they put out their password. Usually not a good thing. So let's get to the discussion today. So joining us today is Justin Snazzle. Like I said, he's the Senior Public Information Officer for the City of Dallas. Before I read the rest of his bio for you, let's get to our first poll question here. So let's talk about what is your opinion on social media as a public record? That it's definitely a public record by law. It might be a public record, but our activity is not worth retaining. You feel strongly it is not a public record, or you don't know. So it's definitely a public record by law. Might be a record, but your activity is not worth retaining. You feel strongly it's not a public record, or you don't know. So let me finish introducing Justin to you. Justin is a 3CMA and Cameo award-winning communications professional and public speaker. He's got 8 years of experience in public and private sector business, specializing in data analytics and brand strategy. He's a leading name in championing transparency, which obviously is the key today, and efficiency in local government. He currently serves as a senior public information officer for the City of Dallas, where he develops communication tools and strategy to promote city objectives and drive stakeholder engagement. And before I give you the results, folks, this is City of Dallas. I told you, I specifically said I was a former law enforcement officer. We want to recognize, because it is Dallas, on July 7th, 5 officers at the City of Dallas lost their lives. It was Senior Corporal Lauren Ahrens, Officer Michael Kroll, Sergeant Michael Smith, Dart Officer Brent Thompson, and Officer Patrick Zamaripa. We want to thank those guys for defending freedom, defending their community, and you're going to see that plays out during this. And just so that you guys know, Justin had a challenging time. His child was born the day before, so it was truly a challenging time for Justin in the City of Dallas. So let's get to our results here real quick. 89% say it's definitely a public record by law. 2% say it might be a record, but their activity is not worth retaining. And 8% of you say that you don't know. So obviously, Justin, transparency is obviously a key issue, and we're going to get into that. So Justin, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Morgan. I appreciate everybody taking the time out of their day to sit down and talk about something that's real important. A bit more background about myself. I am actually a former private sector marketer. I used to work agency PR and digital PR for a couple different companies before I got recruited by the City of Arlington here in Dallas. And when they were recruiting me, they were saying that they wanted to create an enterprise marketing division, and that really just means they want to figure out how to effectively communicate with their citizens. If you think about this from a business aspect, you can say that our residents and our citizens are our customers. And if we're going to communicate properly, we need to treat them as such. And when you're targeting a specific audience, you have to really understand that audience before you can do anything intelligently. And when we refer to transparency is a buzzword in a lot of different agencies. Transparency is something that you can check a box, or it can drive the entire model for your communications department. In Dallas, the city manager, A.C. Gonzalez, established that transparency was a huge priority for us. So in the effort to try to make Dallas more transparent, we felt the need to perform an internal audit on what it actually meant to us and what our audience looked like. And if we were going to communicate with them, we needed to know those things prior. And then establish which ones were our key performance indicators of how we would measure our own success if we were to undertake these things, and what ROI we could establish by this. And that whole shift from thinking like you're in a private sector business to government is applicable when you're trying to sell a product. Just that product is yourself in government. So my advice on creating a transparency model is to define what it means for you, and make sure that you sit down with the city leadership, that you sit down with the decision makers and stakeholders in your agency, and ask them what that transparency actually looks like. Now, Dallas's transparency priorities we established were data and dialogue. Data is, I guess, the more typical type of transparency, and that is essentially, if you got it, show it. We all know, and at least in the state of Texas, we're governed by the Texas Open Records Act, where basically anybody that, if it's not confidential information, can access whatever's on the city servers, any communication that's gone on, any data sets that are available, and they can open request those at any time. That kind of opens a door for us from a transparency perspective. If we have this information and we have it readily available, gone are the days where we have to sit and script out a way to release that. we have taken the position that if we have it, we're just going to go ahead and put it out there. So we embarked on a journey to create a bunch of different open record, open data, financial data portals for the city, establish those and market around those so people actually use them. And that all really did come to a head at July 7th. And as Morgan mentioned earlier, I'm sure you're all familiar with the situation we had in Dallas, but what you might not have known is the effect that that situation had on the communications of the city. Prior to that event, and I was explaining this to some of the panelists here before we got on the call, we had been through a FEMA and Homeland and FBI mock training about a month prior to this incident, in which a shooter was on the SMU campus here in Dallas, and a bomb went off at the W Hotel, and a van escaped and crashed into an overpass and toppled the overpass. And they asked us, how would you handle that? Well, PD went to work, PIO went to work, everybody started talking about how we would handle this from a communications perspective, and these open data portals really did play a huge role in how we were going to get information out. One thing that we did not expect when July 7th actually came was that the influx in traffic would crash a lot of our servers. So our news site is hosted on WordPress and through GoDaddy. Well, that toppled after it got multiple hundreds of thousands of hits within a 10-minute period, topped out our traffic and crashed the site. That was something that we didn't see. But if we had not had our open data portals already established and populated, then media would go ahead and start coming up with stuff since we weren't feeding them information. So that played well into our strategy of how we were going to deal with that. And from an important standpoint, there's a lot of staff burdens that are alleviated by having these records and messaging already readily available. So everybody understands that putting data out there that you have available is probably the best way and the most transparent way to communicate communicate data, at least. But one thing that we're not really familiar with, and one thing we took a stance on in the city of Dallas, was the conversation. And that's another form of transparency that I think gets overlooked too often in government. Transparency in private sector is more conversational anyway. And so taking that back to government, if we're actually having open dialogue, whether that be through web forms, boots on the ground initiatives like Chief Brown's community policing model, if we're able to get out in the community or reciprocate feedback within our social networks and have those play together to allow people to feel vested in the government, that pays dividends. It also helps kind of clear up the messaging. And in a situation like we experienced on July 7th, the messaging was key. We needed to have consistent messaging through multiple parties in a crisis situation where media tends to start speculating and making up their own realities. So having those established channels on social media, the established blog, and different communication channels as far as boots on the ground initiatives go really pay dividends for us. There's some benefits, and the benefits these are generated from what they are for us. It might be different for your agency, but this is how we see the citizens feeling about our open data and our transparency initiatives. Connectivity was more relevant to the way that they feel towards the government, that they actually feel that they're talking to someone rather than a news site or a dead end. Validation. We opened My Dallas Ideas, which is a citizen engagement portal as part of our transparency initiatives, where people can vote and submit ideas to try to make Dallas better. All of that is tracked on the back end by us quantitatively and qualitatively, that we can export a dashboard, hand that off to council and city management so that they can make more appropriate decisions that are factually relevant. And that gives people from a citizen standpoint, validation that they can actually affect change in their community and inevitably improve their quality of life. Staff benefits, and now this one is a bit applicable to us, is that one thing that came out of this July 7th event was, like I said, staff burden. Our open records ladies receive anywhere from 1,300 to 1,700 open record requests per month, which is a lot of open record requests. And there's only 2 full-time open records ladies handling that. And Dallas Police has their own open record unit, and they handle quite a bit as well between cutting footage and all that as well. And by making these things readily available in a understandable manner, makes that a bit easier on our staff and enables us to open up our time and I guess do things that we want to do rather than things that we have to do. It also provides engagement. By hearing people out and understanding their feedback, you're able to make better decisions. And from a qualitative standpoint, which is almost open dialogue, you're able to get a general feeling. And then through quantitative and data, moreover, you're able to statistically say, this is how that community feels. And having transparency initiatives, especially in a digital age, is imperative to making proper decisions. So what does this look like for us? We have undertaken a couple new initiatives when it comes to our open records and open data and transparency. We are working on a new website that's mobile ready, cascades between desktop, tablet, and mobile devices, and built in HTML5 that provides access to all of these portals in a manner that which we can promote that site through social media, through external sites, and through content syndication, advertising methods. And people can be made aware of the different opportunities that they have at their fingertips to get the information that they need to make better decisions and understand their government better. And for me, that's really it for me. I was telling Morgan that I wanted to keep this short because what I would really love is for if you have specific questions about things that you're dealing with, things that we might have dealt with, and any feedback that I can give you, I incentivize you to ask questions. I think that's where people get the most value out of webinars and speaking events is by that interpersonal communication coming into play. So either ask questions here in the forum and we'll answer them if we get a chance, or feel free to reach out to me. I put my personal email address there so you can reach me at any time. My Twitter handle is @jsnazzle, or you can find me on LinkedIn at n/JustinSnazzle. And Morgan, I'll toss it back over to you for the time being.
Hey, Justin, terrific job. And again, hey, look, our hearts go out to you. Obviously, thoughts and prayers with you guys. You guys did a tremendous job handling what had to be obviously one of the worst days in the city's history. So well done, and we look forward to the Q&A coming in. The folks, keep your questions coming in. This is a good chance to really see a true test of how this works, especially on the transparency. So now I get to introduce to you Anil Chawla. Anil is the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial, and it is always great when we get the founder on the calls with us. So before I read you his bio, let's go to our next poll question. So our next poll question now is, how does your agency currently retain records of social media? You don't retain records and you rely on the network, which means you rely on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, whatever, to capture the comments. You take manual captures. That's a tough way, but some people still do it. You take manual captures, screenshots. You use a personal backup tool like Backupify, Social Safe. You use an automated solution for archiving, or you're already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. So either you don't retain your records and you rely on the networks, you take manual captures, you use a personal tool, you use an automated solution, or you are already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. So put your vote in there as I finish reading Anil's background for you. Now, he's CEO, as I said, and founder of ArchiveSocial. It is the public sector's leading provider of technology, and what it does, it helps government agencies archive and manage risk. and you'll find out about the risk here related to social media. ArchiveSocial has already enabled hundreds of government entities such as the City of Chicago, the State of North Carolina, and the world's largest law firm, folks, the U.S. Department of Justice, help them protect and prevent against that. So for legal protection and public records requirements. They were selected for the prestigious Code for America Accelerator in 2013, recognized in 2014 as a cool vendor by leading analyst firm Gartner. They were recognized as a vendor in government and honored as a GovTech 100 company earlier this year by our parent folks here, Government Technology Magazine. And he is also the co-host of the Emmy Award-winning, I guess it's Emmy Award-winning, GovTech Social podcast, because I've been a guest on his as well, too. So let's go to the results here, as they say, real quick. So, Anil, it looks like about 55% of the people, they're not retaining their records and they rely on the networks, and I know you'll cover that, why that's maybe not the best strategy. 14% still take manual captures, about 18% use an automated solution, and 11% are already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. So it sounds like there's a good chance to dive into some good stuff here, Anil, so I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Well, absolutely, Morgan, and thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for carving out some time on your surely busy Thursday to join this presentation. And of course, I want to thank Justin for your participation here today. Folks, for those of you who are not familiar with Justin's work, not only at the City of Dallas, but also at the City of Arlington in Texas, we did actually recently interview Justin on the GovTech Social podcast. So a little plug there to go to govtech.com/social, look for that podcast, and quite an interesting story there in terms of how Justin's able to take those private sector marketing techniques and apply them to government. Now, in the context of today's conversation, I found it, in my conversations with Justin and today, really enlightening to understand that those core principles of how Dallas has approached transparency. Obviously, as Morgan said, the situation over the summer in July was deeply tragic, deeply personal for the city, but you can see from those core principles how that translated to the way that the city, the police department communicated on press conferences, in writing, and of course on social media. And so for my portion of today's webinar, I want to deep dive into social media. As we've all seen in government, social media has truly become one of the most prominent embodiments of transparency. For the first time ever, we as public agencies have an opportunity to have this ongoing two-way conversation between our agency and citizens. And so we see that throughout the country. Dallas is a model example, day in and day out, and of course in crisis. And so I want to talk to you about that transparency that social media creates, again, day in and day out in real time. But I also want to tie that to the long-term transparency. As you saw with Dallas, a number of different open data efforts that transcend from financial data to sort of IT, the electronic records you're used to the 21st century class of electronic records in terms of social media. So we'll talk about that long-term transparency as well. And as Justin said, we're here to answer your questions. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, particularly for Justin, so I'll try to keep some time towards the end for us to address those questions. Now, to jump right in, I was really very happy to see that first poll result. Nearly 90% of the folks on the line today view social media as a definite public record. This is a major shift in the last 2 or 3 years, and I think that really speaks to how social media has evolved and become core to everything that government does. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the academics here, but at a high level, for those of you who are in that 10% bucket of trying to figure out, is this a record or not, or perhaps what you're doing, is that a record or not? Every state has a Records Act. As Justin said, Texas has the Public Information Act. But every state in the United States has an Open Records Act or a Public Records Act that was written a long time ago, but in a very medium or physical form agnostic fashion, where as a government, when you send or receive communications, when you're conducting the business of government, based on the content of those communications, you can generate public records. It doesn't really matter if you're talking about email or social or something else. It's the content that matters. And so various states have come out with guidance on this topic. Texas, for example, has actually updated their Public Information Act to include internet postings as an example of public record. But in general, every state has some guidance. And if you're trying to figure this out in your state, at ArchiveSocial.com, we really try our best to be a resource to government, whether we work with you directly or not. And we do have a U.S. map on our website under the resources section that provides the up-to-date guidance around public records as they pertain to social media. So I encourage you to take a look if you're trying to sort that out in terms of what guidance exists in your locality today. So let's get into some more examples of what's happening in reality. And where I actually want to call out, where I want to start is when we talk about long-term transparency with social media, there's perhaps no better example than the news that we have around the presidential transition. So if you haven't seen this announcement from the White House yet, it's on the blog and something that was picked up by the news across the country. We have our current president was really the first social media president. Given the advent of networks like Twitter, the way Facebook took off, and other networks that were created during his presidency. And so even at the federal level, regardless of how much data we're dealing with, it is one of the top imperatives for the White House to preserve that social media content for the Presidential Records Act, and also for long-term transparency. So a great example here of how this is happening at all forms of government. I'm really excited to share that ArchiveSocial is involved with this effort. So we'll have more news to come in terms of this presidential transition. Now, I'm going to get into examples here in a moment, but right out the gate, we talk about record keeping and long-term transparency. And of course, record keeping is fundamental to the transparency law, the public records laws. And one key question that comes out is, why do I need to do this if it's on Facebook, if the data is on Twitter? And so I want to emphasize this point up front before we get into all these examples, that having the data on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube is a starting point. It's there at some point. It's there when you post it. Ideally, it stays there for some time, but there's no guarantee that it'll stay there as long as you're required to have it for your public records requirements. There's nothing in the terms of service from these networks. And in fact, if you go to Facebook's website, they have a section for law enforcement that says, law enforcement is free to subpoena Facebook for records, but please do so before anything is deleted. And so, again, the networks cannot fulfill your records requirements for you. You can hope that the data is there. You can hope that you could scroll and find it, but that is not, hoping and checking at the time is not an ideal situation for any public agency when it comes to a records request or a legal situation. And so we at ArchiveSocial actually ran a study on this to get some data. As Justin said, it comes down to data and making objective decisions. And in the month of January of this year, we utilized our technology, which not only archives social media, but can actually detect deletions on Facebook in near real time. And we surveyed 400 Facebook pages for public agencies in 1 month and saw nearly 7,800 deletions occur on those 400 pages. It's almost 20 deletions per page. Now, not every page had a deletion, but 3 out of 4 did. And in fact, some of the pages had dozens of deletions. And as an archiving company, I'll tell you very honestly, even we were astounded by this result. Now, when you talk to the agencies that have this presence on Facebook, and some of them have experienced dozens of deletions, they'll tell you that they don't really delete anything. They have a policy of hiding, they delete. And in most cases, that's true. Sometimes we find that staff members are deleting because social media is fairly distributed. But the bigger thing here is that your citizens can delete what they're saying to you. And your citizens may be responding with crime tips. They may be responding with, responses around economic development, feedback around potholes and other issues. That certainly, that kind of content constitutes public record. And if it's being deleted, you're losing a public record. And so something to really think about. You cannot simply rely on the networks to have this data for as long as you're required to have it. So let's talk about what those records look like. I know a percentage of you were in the poll responded that you're not quite sure that your social media generates records. And very much in line with the tragedy that Dallas experienced. We've unfortunately had a trying year over the course, particularly over the summer, in terms of mass shootings. And we have to acknowledge the shooting in Orlando being the worst mass shooting in the history of the United States. Now, these topics are sensitive topics. They're hard to talk about, but one of the reasons that we often bring this up and why I'm bringing it up today is that social media and the use of transparent or the ability to be transparent through social media has been game-changing for the agencies, for the citizens, for the public in general. And as Justin said, during that crisis, it can be overwhelming. It can bring down your website. And these open data type efforts and the use of transparency can really help your staff from being overburdened. And I want to highlight Orlando here for just a really smart decision in the midst of the night, in the midst of a crisis, to tweet this out and say, all updates will come from this Twitter account, no email or phone calls, please. And this, again, reduced the burden to Orlando, but also provided a very transparent, up-to-date, near real-time conversation with the public, allowing folks to stay up to date with what was happening. So a best practice here, and something that we should applaud as a silver lining in terms of transparency. Now, I want to mention that, again, I hope that where you are, you'll never experience any crisis of that sort, but every locality experiences crisis situations, whether they're small or big. And sometimes you experience crisis situations that are actually generated online and then affect you in reality. And City of South Daytona is a perfect example. You may have seen this photo of a dog's mouth duct tape on the internet, and a really terrible photo. And it created an outcry in the City of South Daytona because when the woman who posted this on her personal Facebook feed, she actually location tagged City of South Daytona. Now here's the kicker: she was not in the City of South Daytona when she did that. It was a false location tag. But nonetheless, the city received an outcry from the public. This went viral. A city that receives just a handful of social media postings a day received 24,000 comments in a few days, and they were completely overwhelmed. But they were able to use social media, one, to just quickly respond to citizens, but two, over time, keep the citizens up to date, provide a transparent dialogue there of the fact that while this woman was not in South Daytona, they were working with law enforcement to find her across the country. And they really used social media, again, to manage this crisis. And by the end of it, it was incredible to see the kind of praise the city and the police department was receiving for communicating so transparently. So again, a crisis can strike any time, whether that's a physical crisis or it's a virtual crisis, whether you generated it or not. But the real positive note here is that social media, and while it even generated the crisis in the first place, can help you turn around citizen sentiment and really help your agency get through the crisis in a way that was never possible before. And then finally, I want to take this to a more day-to-day level. So we're talking about crisis emergency situations. These are the kinds of situations that everyone faces, whether it's weather-related, whether it's some other crime. That's when social media shines, but it also generates records that must be retained. But I also want to point out that the entire purpose of every government agency is to serve the citizens. And social media, again, is one of the most prominent channels of doing that today. So day in and day out, answering questions, providing clarifications. In this example, the Austin Code Department responding to a report of grass that had not been taken care of and asking for a photo. This is citizen service, and this is the kind of stuff that we can't forget generates public records. And that happens on every agency page as long as that page is engaging in some social dialogue. So keep that in mind. And ultimately, the transparency does matter. While there are folks that sort of abuse the system and create a lot of headache in terms of public records, there are, of course, valid reasons for public records. And here's a tweet from a citizen in Seattle who was relying on Twitter feeds to stay up to date and was concerned that he could no longer rely on those Twitter feeds. And he actually issued a tweet that said, I would like all of the archives of your tweets. Please consider this a Public Records Act request. So this is a public records request for social media using social media. So that's a real sign of the times. But more often than not, what we're seeing is that while many of our customers are receiving the occasional records request that directly asks for Twitter or Facebook or other social networking sites, more often than not, the real trend we're seeing is that the types of public records requests that you've always received, that you are receiving today, more and more of those records requests now include social media. So if you have a records request that says all notifications of the street closure, all emails and communications between, it may encompass your social media, particularly with things like street closures where you're providing up-to-date notifications during weather events. So keep that in mind. And again, another reason why cities like Dallas have taken a very transparent approach to get the data out there for anyone who's wondering, well, where were all these communications? How can I see how you responded? Well, this data is now out and open and available, and that's really a best practice. So again, I want to kind of, as I talk through these cases, I recognize that when we talk about legal, we talk about these public records requests can get a little scary. And I want to remind folks that at the end of the day, government is so important in the service that you provide to people's lives that unfortunately legal situations do happen. But the real message here is that social media, the vast majority of the time, is a positive mechanism. It helps you and the citizens. And really our goal with this, as I move through these examples, is we're going to talk about record keeping and being proactive so that you can simply weather those situations like you are already doing so with email and other forms of content. I really want to position your agency with social media so that you can respond to these situations without it becoming a real headache for the agency, and therefore you can continue to get the benefits of social. So I want to give you just two quick examples of agencies that were able to do that. Margate, Florida, this is something you may not have read about in the news, but we see this day in and day out with agencies we work with. A citizen was promoting their own website, a commercial website on the Margate Facebook feed, and it was violating the policy. And so the communications team there decided to go ahead and hide those comments. And the citizen actually said, "Wait a minute, you can't do that. This is Florida. This is a sunshine state. You have to have all these communications kept." Margate said, "Well, no problem. We have archiving because they have ArchiveSocial." And then the citizen said, "Well, I think you're unfairly censoring me compared to everybody else," and actually issued a public records request for everything that had been hidden on Facebook in the past few months. And so again, this is something that can be a real headache and really burden your staff. But because Margate was forward-thinking and proactive, they went through their social media archive, were able to produce a report of everything that they had hid or deleted from Facebook and pass that on to the citizen to show that they were consistently enforcing policy in a way that ensures that their use of Facebook was productive. And then in San Marcos, Texas, again, not only have we had these mass shootings, unfortunately, but the weather events are always there, particularly in these corners of the country. And a real success story here for San Marcos, despite the tragedy of the floods that happened last year in Texas, they were able to use social media to communicate with the public, ensure safety, and also gather information from the public. The public was reporting things like stoplights that were down and other events. And so they had a social media archive in place. And with every crisis, what we tend to see is that there's an influx of public records requests afterwards. And because San Marcos was already archiving with their social media, and social media was the prominent channel of emergency response, when they received those public records requests, they were able to respond to them. Not only that, but because they had an archive of social media, they actually took some time to study the social media response. They constructed a disaster timeline on social media. They looked at the types of topics that citizens cared about during that disaster. And it really paid off for them. They used that content from their archive because 6 months later, they had another flood in Texas, and they were that much more prepared to deal with the circumstance. So a lot of benefits to archiving that actually stem beyond the legal requirements themselves. So let's now talk about solving this issue, being proactive, getting ahead of it so that like Dallas, like these cities we've talked about, you're in position to not only meet the requirements and fulfill those obligations, but do so in a way that eliminates the burden on the side of your agency and really helps the citizens access this long-term transparent information. And ultimately, when it comes to social media, our recommendation, of course, is social media archiving, just like you archive your email. Now, very clearly, we are a company that provides social media archiving in full disclosure. But my goal here today is really to make the case that you should do something rather than nothing, whether that's with us or with anybody else. And what I want to do is provide some guidance on best practices of how to archive and arm you with that as you think about how you approach the issue in the best way possible for your agency. And so at ArchiveSocial, we, as a company that's focused 100% on social media, nearly 100% on government, we broke this problem down into 4 simple factors. This is how we think about record keeping and how you can do it in the most effective way possible for social. The first is thinking about frequency, getting this data in your control. As we saw, the data can be deleted from Facebook. There's no guarantee that it'll stay there. It can be deleted from any social network. So the longer you wait, the longer it's possible the data disappears. So you need to get it in your control and as frequently as possible. And in this arena, real-time or near real-time capture is the best practice with social. Comprehensiveness, you want to have more rather than less. So the records requirements are spanning a wide variety of issues. And ultimately with social, while not everything is a record, you really can't make that decision until you have the data in your control. So you need to be comprehensive and have more rather than less. And there's also this issue of metadata that we'll touch on in a moment. Authenticity is all about not taking shortcuts with your data. Ultimately, if you're going to do this, you're going to have archiving. It's to protect you legally, so ensure that your data can serve as legal evidence. And then context is perhaps most overlooked and really critical with social media, given how complex and dynamic social media can be. So the way to think about this is if you do receive a records request from a natural disaster, say 4 years from now, looking back, how will you recreate that Facebook conversation that had thousands of comments on it or hundreds of comments on it with all that multimedia? How would you do that and make sense of it and ensure that the person asking for it feels like their request was fulfilled? So we're going to walk through these in more detail. Real quick note on metadata. This is an interesting issue with electronic records. So what you see is not always what you get, because with an electronic record like a tweet, you might see 140 characters, or in this case 126 characters, but you actually get a lot more. Behind a tweet, there's nearly 2,000 characters of metadata, information about user IDs, timestamps, location information. And the reason why I talk about this is those of you who are screenshotting today, not only is screenshotting burdensome as a form of record keeping, hard to manage, hard to search, but it's not a really great record. I applaud you for doing something rather than nothing, but I encourage you to look at some archiving technology that can get you the full electronic record. There have been 2 states in which a lawsuit has gone to the Supreme Court around this type of technical metadata being a part of the public record. And the 2 times this has gone to the Supreme Court in these 2 different states, in each of these states, both times the states have ruled, yes, this electronic metadata is as much public record as the content that you see in the communication. So pay attention to metadata in your archiving approach. The other thing that I'll say is that when it comes to social media archiving, we have to remember that social media is really new and it's changing. There's no standardization between the data format of a Facebook photo versus a YouTube video versus a Twitter tweet. And you have to be really careful in archiving this data, because it's not as simple as just saying, yeah, we grab the data and we store it somewhere, we have it, because there's a lot of complexity and the devil's in the details. So be really cautious with any archiving solution that sort of hand waves their capture of social. You have to pay attention to things like all the comments that come in, the fact that you can reply to comments nowadays, and you have multi-level comments, the fact that you have multimedia that can be embedded in the post. Citizens often now include photos in their comments. They include stickies and emojis. You have live streaming, like Periscope, live video on Facebook. And so really pay attention to your archiving solution, because it may capture some of Facebook, but some is not the same as being comprehensive and being truly protected. And not only Facebook, but other networks like Vimeo and Pinterest and Google Plus and Instagram. Ensuring that no shortcuts are taken is really critical, because when a legal situation comes up and you've been archiving, you want to be able to stand by your records. One real key here is not only having the data at that fidelity, but being able to produce it. We call this replay, social media replay. So let's say you're doing a records request and you find a comment. Well, that comment alone doesn't really satisfy that records request. You really need the conversation. So in this case, we can reconstruct that comment back to the original Instagram post that it came on. That's really important, not only in the archiving product that you're using, but ultimately a best practice for any archiving solution today is to be able to generate those records in PDF. Now, I mentioned that situation with Margate, Florida, where a citizen issued a records request for deleted content on Facebook. Well, here is the actual output. On the left side, you can see the two pages of the PDF. And what's really interesting about this is that when the city did the search for deleted content, certain comments had been deleted because they violated policy. But if the city had just produced those comments alone, that doesn't really help, because you can't really make sense of what that means by just looking at the individual comments. So look for an archiving technology that reconstructs that content. You can see we reconstructed it to the entire conversation and then highlighted the matches of what was deleted. So that kind of reconstruction and then putting in a PDF is really a best practice today, so that when you send this to a reporter or an interest group or whoever else is asking for this, there's not this back and forth about whether or not you really fulfilled the records request. And then finally, I want to highlight that, again, archiving, as we saw at San Marcos, isn't just about legal, but there are lots of benefits to having this data. Obviously, Dallas has so many initiatives in place for open data, because the use of data, data is an enabler. Now, with archiving technologies today, one area that we've been really pushing on is using the fact that an archive centralizes and captures your data to then provide day-to-day risk management. So doing things like alerting you when content violates your policy, letting you know when citizens are asking you questions, and sending you email alerts so that you can be responsive, and then giving you analytics on that data so you can understand how your citizens are responding to your content, even to the point of understanding which of your content is generating a high negative emotional response or high positive response. That's the kind of thing that archiving technologies today can enable you to do beyond the legal side. Now, last but not least, we've talked about, again, the tragic situation in Dallas. I touched on the situation in Orlando, and we've seen crisis situations of all types, whether they're large or small. And one thing I'll leave you with is while we encourage every agency out there to take record keeping into your hands, have archiving for social, we realize that not every agency is there yet. You may be working on your budget. It may be something that's a next priority. So in the meantime, I want to highlight one pro bono effort that ArchiveSocial has created called Crisis Support. If you encounter a crisis, we hope that you'll use social media because of how powerful it is. And if you use social, we want to protect you. We will actually give you completely free access to our technology for 30 days to archive, manage the risk, and have those records in case there are public records requests, in case there's legal situations that come out of your crisis. We'll do that at no charge, no obligation to help out because we believe in the value that social media and transparency provides during a crisis situation. So check that out, especially if you or an agency you know is dealing with a crisis situation. And then, Morgan, we're right at the end of my slides, and I had hinted at this with Justin in the pre-call. I really love the way that Dallas promotes transparency. I'm going to take a moment here to actually bring up a screen share and direct folks to Dallas's website and highlight the social media archives that they have in place to really tie all of this together, and particularly the archive that was there in terms of open data during, of course, the big crisis in July, but in general for citizens of Dallas to access. So you should be able to see my screen here in a moment. I want to make sure that that's refreshing. I know it buffers a little bit, so folks bear with me for just a few more seconds. And I'm actually accessing the Dallas City Hall. You can get to their open records portal here, and you can just see how much Dallas makes open. Everything from police records requests to their full open data portal to financial transparency. So again, Dallas being a large city, while of course they have a lot of resources, it takes a lot of effort in a city like that to break through and have this level of transparency. So really applaud Justin, his team, and his colleagues in Dallas for the level of transparency they put together. And in the context of social media, I want to highlight this open social media archive they have, which you can click to and get to. And again, this is an open interface for anyone to access. It consolidates the social media activity from the city of Dallas, both what they've said and the responses back, because all of that is potentially public record. And so you can go here yourself. You have the ability to search this at a high amount of granularity, searching across all the different platforms, searching for various keywords. A lot of power here in this open social archive. But what I'll do real quick when you go here is that Dallas has highlighted a few example searches. For example, street services. So we'll go ahead and click on this. And just give you a real sense of social media archiving technology and what I mean about having context and the ability to replay. And so you'll see this search result has about 1,400 responses related to street services, of course, comments around potholes and so forth. And what I'll do is I'll just drill down to some of this content here. We'll just drill down to look at comments on the Facebook timeline and narrow this search down. Yeah, in a few seconds, we can really drill down to specific conversations. So if you had a records request, for example, this is a citizen-facing version, but as staff members, you also can do this. You can easily drill down and find that needle in the haystack with this type of technology that's consolidating hundreds of thousands of records here, and find what you're looking for. And you may find this comment. Let's just go to one real positive comment here. Great job, BPD. And again, when I mentioned context, being able to reconstruct, replay that social media, we might have found the comment we were looking for, but that comment alone, again, isn't enough. So having the ability to replay that conversation to the comments in the original post that it was about. You can also see in regards to the street services, Dallas requested citizen feedback. Tell us how you want your tax dollars spent. You can see the conversation it generated on social around the survey, and the ability to replay these dozens upon dozens of comments with all the multimedia and responses from the citizens, and having that accurate record, and how critical it is to have that record, but then you can see this best practice that Dallas has employed of making it open, available, and searchable. So again, really applaud the work that's been done in Dallas. And with that, I want to hand back to Morgan so that we can address your questions.
Well, first of all, Anil, great job on that. And as you guys can see, it's very comprehensive. So what we're going to do now is that we've got time for some questions with Justin and Anil. And actually, this first one is for you, Justin. It comes from Bushra Malik, New York City Department of Emergency Management. Well, and this is New York asking about city size, so it's actually a good contrast here. Ask, do you think the size of your city impacts your social media strategies? If you were bigger or smaller, would they be the same? What's your thoughts around that, Justin?
I believe it's more of a multi-tiered question, and I can speak to this a bit because of my time with the city of Arlington, which is significantly smaller, still a top 50 U.S. city, but significantly smaller than Dallas. A good social strategy scales. So if you set up a strategy that highlights and identifies key performance indicators for you and priorities, and you attack those full scale, it doesn't matter how big your social presence is, how big your city is, it should be effective. Now, to kind of counter that, the size of city usually presents more challenges from a population and an audience standpoint, as well as a resources standpoint. So, for instance, in the city of Arlington, our social media was a different feel. It was more open dialogue. It was more, it was friendly. It was a community element to it. There was a partnership element to it. We had strategic partnerships with restaurants, with Texas Health Resources on sponsored content, and it was seemingly everybody getting along. Now, you had your bad apples every once in a while that just seemed to want to burn the whole thing down. However, we worked to facilitate a network of city advocates that would always come to our defense whenever somebody would attack us. For instance, I remember when I was with Arlington, one of my first, I think it was my first 6 months on the job, maybe a year, that we are at a Chick-fil-A grand opening event down off North Collins area. And I remember we tweeted something about it with the cow, and I got a response like, why are we eating fried chicken? And there was a whole religious debate going on with Chick-fil-A at the time, and they started shouting us out. And then all of a sudden, this network of people who believed in the city, who loved the city and everything that we stood for, came to bat for the city. So we didn't have to do that, and that was because of the work that we had put in on the back end, establishing community and partnerships as one of our KPIs, or our priorities, rather. When we moved to Dallas, Dallas was a bit different. Dallas is gigantic. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of grandfathered ways of doing things in the city. There's just a lot of the hands in the kitchen, or whatever you want to say. And our social strategy had to change to be more of an effective communication model as to let's get city news and services out, and let's make sure that we're doing it in a manner in which it can be digested mobilely, and make sure that that's comprehensive enough that we're feeding media and the citizens at the same time. So the strategy, yes, it changed, but the actual strategy itself, the model that we built, it's all the same. You're just establishing KPIs and your priorities and attacking those head on.
Well, living in Loudoun County with the Redskins headquarters just down the road from me, I can tell you that there is always social media engagement right before, during, and after games. So I'll put you guys down there. By the way, folks, the Cowboy Stadium is actually in Arlington. It's not in Dallas. So there's a little factoid for you. Hey, and Anil, during your presentation, and actually I'm going to consolidate a couple questions here, you actually brought up the issue as people are planning, and we know that a lot of budgets run from July 1st to June 30th. People may be in the planning stage right now. Would you cover really quickly about how much does ArchiveSocial cost? And the other one is, and what does it take, basically to, how complicated is the process to get started?
Sure, happy to. And so in terms of pricing, we sell a transparency product. We think that any company that's selling transparency should be transparent. So you can actually go to our website, archivesocial.com, and look for the pricing link at the top. But the general answer to your question, Morgan, is we understand that this is a emerging issue, that archiving in general is a proactive action. Most of the agencies that do this have yet to face the situation. Now we have dozens of case studies now of staff members and agencies that we're really grateful they did, because they were able to, again, weather the storm. But we did price this to be a discretionary spend. So to some degree, we know government, most purchases operate on that fiscal cycle, but we actually see kind of a consistent adoption of this archiving technology throughout the year. And when I say discretionary spend, our pricing is intentionally designed so that it's under $5,000 annual for 80% of cities and counties in the country. We want to get this in your hands. We believe everybody needs it in terms of record keeping. Virtually every agency archives email. Every agency will need to archive social. And so we set at that pricing, and because of that discretionary spend, Most agencies are able to adopt it out of cycle. We're able to prorate and things like that to get you to the budget cycle. Now, the pricing could be lower than that. It could be higher than that based on your overall usage, but that's a general guideline. And in terms of adoption, you asked about how complicated this is, and I don't like to even bring up the word complicated at all because this is fully in the cloud. The vast majority of our agencies that purchase ArchiveSocial receive a link to get their archive going online, and they have it set up in less than 30 minutes. We have a dedicated customer success manager to help you, but less than 30 minutes what we're talking about here. So this is a kind of a quick win if you're able to get the funds in place and you're able to recognize the importance of this for your agency.
And great, and folks, and coming from state and local government, we folks all understand the importance of being able to spend discretionary funds or make it affordable. Hey, Jason or Justin, this one's for you. Sorry, I said Jason. That's the name of my oldest boy. Good name though. But Justin, for you, I noticed that when Anil had the page pulled up going into the archives, and it showed a lot of your platforms. I saw things like Flickr, looked like Google Plus, Facebook. I wasn't sure if I saw Vimeo, but YouTube. You know, how many platforms do you operate, kind of why, and which ones do you find that you have the most engagement on? And I guess kind of the follow-up question is that too many platforms to manage at one time? Does that make the task complex, or does each one really fill a specific niche or need for you?
Well, the answer, first of all, it's okay that you call me Jason. My aunt called me Jason as a teenager. She just could never get it right, and I get that all the time. But so no worries on that end. Now, what we do at the city, and I've been a proponent of making sure that we do a few things really well. So the city public information office operates about 3 social medias avidly. And that's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And we do that on purpose. So to answer one of your latter questions, our main social media are really Facebook and Twitter. And we want to have a few social profiles that everybody knows where to engage on. And we want to do those right and have a specific strategy for each one of those. So our strategy is Twitter is a big, I guess, a cross-promotion tool and an outreach mechanism for media. Our Facebook is more of a community field where we're talking about community issues, programs, services, and things like that, and having that interpersonal communication going on. From the PIO standpoint, we do, by charter, have control over all social profiles for the entire city. Therefore, the entire city, through all departments and offices and divisions, have a bunch of different social media platforms that they operate on. Flickr, they do have one. I think some people are on Snapchat, some people are on Pinterest, some people are on all sorts of Vine, everything. So we do archive those just for open records purposes, but we don't, as a city, have a model from the PIO level to manage those, and that's on purpose. And I do find it challenging to have a content schedule for multiple social medias, which is actually one of the reasons that we created My Dallas Ideas as a portal for citizens to communicate, because you can use single sign-on through OAuth sign-on and use your social media profile to log on to our platform. Therefore, if we can build out, invest early in our own internal City of Dallas infrastructure, we can have that conversation and facilitate those conversations in an environment where you can use all of these other social media profiles and platforms as a sign-on mechanism to enter the conversation. So that's a unique view that we've taken as a city, and that's not being done in many other cities. So we're pretty excited about that.
Well, and that's a great corollary for you, Anil, to talk about. I mean, I know that ArchiveSocial captures a lot of platforms. Which ones do you capture? And then, there's always the issue of how far back can I go and start? Is this starting today going forward, or, how far back can I go and capture content? And does it do it, how often does it do it? So can you share with us, like, the platforms you cover and then talk about the content?
Sure. And the general question of what you should capture and keep record of is anything that you're conducting business on. And, of course, we're seeing a continued influx of new social networks. So there's this period of figuring out whether that social network is going to make a meaningful difference for your agency, understanding what the engagement looks like. And so you do want to prioritize, from an ArchiveSocial standpoint, we support Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Flickr, Vimeo, Pinterest, and Google+. We'll continue to expand. New networks are getting traction. And so one side of it is how much engagement are you having on that platform? The second side of it is that to archive it, any archiving technology really needs the network to make that data available. So as new networks emerge, we do work with those networks to make their data available so that it can be archived. And in general, in terms of the frequency, in terms of the capture, a best practice again is native capture. Anything that falls back to web crawling or web scraping is really a massive trade-off. So you really want native capture, meaning that the archiving technology talks to the network and gets the data in an authentic format. And you want to look for near real-time or real-time. Not every network makes content available in real-time, but then you want archiving technology that checks throughout the hour to get the data to minimize data loss. And Morgan, was there any aspect of that question that I still need to answer?
It was just actually the thing, too, is if somebody starts today, is it only go for today? Or I think a lot of this, you can actually go back in time and capture previous activity, right?
Yeah, thanks for the reminder on that. That's a really important question that comes up a lot. It really depends on the network. So certain networks like Facebook's seem to go back all the way to the history. In most cases, we're seeing that we can go to the inception of the page. But it really depends on what's still available in the network and what the network actually transmits to us. So it depends by network, but most of the major platforms are able to go back in time and get the data from when you started the page.
Yeah, and look, guys, we could go on, and we could, but obviously, or unfortunately, we're at the top of the hour here, so we have to bring it to a close. So what I want to say, first of all, thank you, Justin Snazzle. Thank you for being on, and thank you for the work that you guys are doing down at Dallas. And again, our thoughts and prayers go out to you guys down there. I know it's still a tough time down there. And Anil Chawla, thank you guys for being on. And also a special thanks to our partner, ArchiveSocial. We can't do this without the help of our partners like ArchiveSocial. So if you guys have any questions, drop us a note. You can reach me this way. You can also make sure you stay tuned, watch your email. We will be sending a link out of this within 48 hours. Download it down at the bottom, webinar resources, download your PDF. Please, please, please fill out the survey. Folks, have a safe and happy Christmas season, holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on another government technology event. Everybody have a great afternoon, and thank you for joining us.